At what age is it okay for a child to start lifting weights? And at what age would you be considered too old to start training at all? Is there a number? I think they might surprise you. So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. I think this is an important one, especially if you've got children or you are approaching later in life and you're starting to think you are past it. So let's pull up a chair and talk it through. Hey, welcome back to another video, or if this is your first video, where have you been all my life? This is the latest video in a series of videos for the Gym Paradox, the pros and cons of joining a gym, a series of videos that we've been putting up on the channel for several weeks now, and it's all based on an original piece of content put up on DCSfit.com, for which I will leave a link in the description below. And while you're down there, if you wouldn't mind, as always, giving this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and if you want to get notifications as soon as new videos go up, then hit that notification bell. Today we're talking about at what age is it okay to start training? And we're looking at both ends of the spectrum here. At what age is it too young to begin training? And at what age would it be considered too old to begin training? So let's start off with the young end. When it comes to what age can you begin training, the definition of training becomes important here because when kids can start moving, as soon as they can start walking and support themselves, they move. They start shifting. And I know this from personal experience. My son is when he's on the go, he is on the go, and that is a lot of exercise and a lot of calories being burned. And obviously, when I owned a gym, he would come along to it every now and again, and would quite often be intrigued by things and want to be picking up weights. And I think that started when he was 2. He was lifting weights off the ground and trying to show what he could do and what he could lift, and trying to mimic what was going on around him a little bit. And that's all just fun, but that's not really training because there's no intent behind it. There's no discipline to it. There's no structure to it. There's no goals being set. It's just a case of, there's a heavy thing, can I pick that thing up? Look what I can do, daddy. I can lift this 16 kilo kettlebell up when I'm 4, which he was doing. So there's no reason why a child can't be lifting heavy things. Now, just to get into the argument here, there was a philosophy or an idea that went around for years, decades, that kids should not be lifting weights, shouldn't be doing resistance-based training because it would potentially stunt their growth. They were still growing, and so it might cause compression in their skeletal system and cause problems in their growth patterns. That has been debunked, and it has been for many years now. So that should not be a factor in considering whether or not a child can be doing resistance-based training. But there are still factors. Keeping in mind the fact that kids are still growing and developing within themselves, their brain function is still developing. Your brain function continues to develop and doesn't really reach maturity, full maturity, until you're about 25. So I'm sorry if you're listening to this and you're 18 or 19, you ain't there yet. There's still some development to go. That again can be a topic for another video, or you can go and look up a little bit more detail on that. But the way that the brain develops over time, it's not fully developed into what you would call a fully adult brain until somewhere around your mid-20s. But when you get to sort of earlier ages, there's a lot of work to still be done as far as just treating things in a methodical, what many people would consider an adult way. However, when it comes to getting your child to do something that is a bit more structured, a lot of that's going to be down to you. And there's definitely benefit in doing it at a younger age because it can help develop stronger bones, stronger muscles. And if there are imbalances or weaknesses starting to show up in the child's body, then doing something to sort of redress that a little bit and work on those imbalances is probably going to be beneficial. The problem is it's still a child, and children have attention deficit disorder, even if they don't have attention deficit disorder. Short attention spans, really. That's what a better way of phrasing it. A child is not going to sit down for the most part. Some might, but most kids are not going to be so focused on this thing where they can train for like an hour and still stay completely focused and in the moment and keep themselves perfectly safe. It'll start to become like a plaything, uh, maybe trying to act out or just be wacky with what they're doing, just want to have fun with it. It'll seem fun at first, but as soon as it becomes a discipline or a chore, then it can be very off putting. And if they're not concentrating, just like with adults, it can become very dangerous. Weirdly, with kids, because they're more flexible and they have more maneuverability, they can usually do a little bit more. If you ever look at a child squatting, like when a toddler is playing with toys and things like that, they tend to sit in a squat position, and it is a perfect squat position. And we tend to lose that over time. A lot of that is because we continue to develop and our skeletal structure grows and we become tighter generally. And so the bones start to connect up and fuse and we can't quite get into that position so easily. Whereas kids are a bit more rubbery, I guess. And so the chances of them being hurt are actually slightly less, again, providing you're being careful. But that attention deficit thing is definitely something to be looking at. So keeping things short is going to be beneficial. Short workouts, and they have to be invested in it. If they don't care, if they're being forced to do it, and you're kind of forcing them to lift this heavy thing, they might not be paying attention, and there is still a good chance of injury. So it is not worth the risk unless they are on board with what you're trying to do with them. When it comes to actually getting into a gym, there's might be an issue there anyway, because when it comes to like personal trainers, for example, the course will state that you shouldn't be training anyone under the age of 18. So you need specialist training to allow you to do that. But even with that specialist training, then a lot of it comes down to Disclosure Scotland and or, well, because I'm in Scotland, but there'll be disclosures and things to make sure that you are a suitable person to be left alone with a child. And the most part, you wouldn't be able to do that. And in the most part, what ends up happening is the parent has to be there. And the parent is essentially the person in charge, and the PT is then offering guidance at that point rather than um, being the person telling the kid what to do. The trainer would tell the parent, and the parent is relaying that to the child to be able to say, yes, that's okay, you can do that now. A lot of venues won't allow anyone in under the age of 18. Some people limit to 16, and then they'll need extra insurance or extra caveats to go along with that, or they'll need sort of like written authority from the parents. There are some places that will allow kids in over the age of 14 as more like taster days, usually during the summer holidays, that kind of thing tends to happen. Trying to find somewhere that does anything less than that could be a struggle. So that could be a thing in its own right. But the idea of just getting a child to lift weights, at what age should that be happening? The limitations that are put on from the facilities, they're doing it from an insurance point of view to protect themselves, that kind of thing. It's not because kids should not be training at 15, 14, 13. To give an actual number on what is a good time for a child to start lifting weights, most people kind of agree that there's enough development has gone along and enough coordination has gone on that by the time a child reaches 7 or 8, it should be possible for them to start lifting weights. But it is with those caveats. You have to be at a point where you're focused, you're paying attention to what you're doing, taking it seriously, understanding the risks, and that could come at very different ages for many different children, as with everything in development. But again, that happens with adults. If you're in your 30s or your 40s and you're distracted and you're not really paying attention to what you're doing, you could injure yourself. If you're in your 30s or your 40s and your mobility is not quite what it was, you've got limitations in your body. And I've spoke about this at length in other videos, and I've put it on articles, and it's all up on social media. These are things that should be addressed first. So it's the same thing when it comes to children. It's just the fact that they might not have developed it in the first place to have lost it. But these are important things. One other thing to keep in mind is that smaller little bodies tend to pump blood at a faster rate, their heart rates tend to be higher, they overheat a lot quicker. So trying to keep them going for long periods of time is not beneficial. Giving them frequent breaks and lots of water to keep, or lots of fluids to keep them hydrated is definitely something that's worth doing. When it comes to the other end of the spectrum, how old can you be and still start lifting weights? The true answer is any age. It doesn't matter what age you are. There is no reason that you cannot be lifting weights. So anyone who's using the excuse of I'm too old to start. No, you're not. You're never too old to start. You just have to be more careful than you did when you were in your 20s. But as time goes on, you might have to adapt how you're training. And depending on when you start, it's going to be easier or harder to be training in your later years. So, for example, someone in their mid 50s who is just starting would have to train incredibly differently from someone else in their mid 50s who's been training since their mid 20s, because that person has developed um, the neural patterns, the muscular development, the coordination. They just know what they're doing and their body is stronger for it. They won't have had the degradation that you have by doing nothing and being sedentary for all that time. So the earlier you can start, the better. That's always going to be true. And the more consistent you can be through your life, the better. But that is not a reason not to start. Just don't start in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s and try and do it the same way that somebody was doing it in their 20s or 30s. Don't mimic someone that is not similar to you. Similarly, if you're in your 80s or 90s and you see someone else who is still training in their 80s and 90s, but they've been training since they've been in their 20s or 30s or something, don't try and copy them either, because they have experience that you don't. The goal is to always be assessing what it is you're trying to overcome. Why are you training? That's always an important question to have at any age. Why are you doing this? Don't just do it because people say that you should. There is an issue that you're trying to overcome. There is a weakness you're trying to overcome, an imbalance you're trying to overcome. What are these things that you're trying to overcome? And then work on them methodically, slowly, and with intent. Don't just randomly walk into a gym and think, oh, well, people say I'm supposed to squat, I'm going to squat. People say I'm supposed to deadlift, I'm going to deadlift. Usually, if you're starting, or even if you have been training for a while, to be honest, once you start passing your 40s, you really have to be a little bit more careful. And changing the style of training is usually wise. Moving slightly away from compound barbell movements towards more unilateral movements is generally a good idea. It puts less strain on your nervous system. It means that you're using a lower load because you wouldn't be able to compensate with your stronger side for your weaker side, and therefore you're working on these imbalances a little more. The pressure into your joints is not quite as much, but your range of motion is usually bigger and you can work on that range of motion. And that's usually the thing as you get older. And I know it, I'm feeling it. You know, being in my mid 40s is not the same as it was when I was in my mid 30s. You can feel the range of motion is gone, and the aches and the pains, you have to be more careful for them because they come up more frequently, and then working around them and trying to work on your mobility becomes a bigger factor. But that doesn't mean to say you shouldn't be lifting weights. As you get older, if you don't use it, you lose it, and the degradation in your skeletal structure, so bone density, is a real concern, particularly for women. So actually, I'd say that this is more of a thing for women than for men, but it tends to be the other way around, as in the participation in the uptake. If you feel that you are getting a little bit weaker and your range of movement is not there, definitely start working on it. But if you don't feel it yet, it's probably going to come if you don't do something about it. And the sooner you can start, the better. But at the extreme end of it, even though I could give a number of 7 or 8 for the young end, there is no number for the top end. There are people that have started in their late 70s and early 80s, started training, and have done incredible things with their bodies at that age. And they didn't begin until that age. There are bodybuilders in their 90s I think there's one who's over 100. I think there is. I would have to look that up. But but there's definitely some in their 90s. I've seen numerous 90-year-old plus bodybuilders, and many 80 plus bodybuilders. And I've seen many people who have started in their late 70s. So there is no reason not to start at any age. There will be limitations that may have developed that mean that you either have to be incredibly careful, or there may be limitations that really do medically mean that you cannot start. But it's not because of your age, it's because of a condition. And so speak to your doctor or your GP just to ensure that this is something that is safe. The only caveat I would put with that is speaking to your GP is always a little bit risky in my view, because yes, get their advice, but get maybe advice from more than one if you're getting very overly safe advice. GPs, I find, quite often go down the route of rest and back off and do less, because if they advise you to do something and then you hurt yourself, then they could be at fault. So we're going back to risk aversion from their side here, whereas actually doing a little bit more, but understanding the risks, that goes down to you then at that point. But you can always manage the risk. It should always be risk versus reward, though. Don't do something that's high risk, has low reward. Do something that has low to moderate risk, but a very high reward, or very low risk to a moderate reward. But the risk should always be lower than the reward that you're getting out of it. When it comes to other styles of training, some things are just natural. Going for a walk, most people just walk generally during their day. So making the time to go and exercise and just keep yourself moving is definitely something that's worth doing. Staying mobile is clearly a benefit, but there are some other styles of training that you might want to consider where you are in life and what your position is at the moment before you jump into them. For example, if you are looking at cardio and you're trying to assess whether you should walk or whether you should run, certainly later in life, walking is probably going to be more beneficial. The main reason most people would want to run is because it saves time. You can burn more calories and you can do more in a shorter period of time. But the impact that you're creating through your body is a lot greater when you're running compared to walking. If you want to sort of up the intensity, trying to find another route to do it that doesn't have the same level of impact, especially as you're moving on in life, by using, say, a bike or jumping on a rowing machine or something, using one of those kind of machines. Um, these are all things that are definitely worthwhile doing. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you're doing something like even just a walk, making sure that you function properly and it's not going to cause you injuries is worth doing. So doing things like a wet test, which I'll not go into in great detail here, but basically involves wetting your foot and then standing on a piece of dark paper or something, or cardboard, and then you can see your footprint and you can figure out from that whether or not you have a fallen arch or you've got high arches or something. That can determine what kind of footwear you should be wearing. But it's not the be all and end all. Weirdly, I have neutral arches, but I do have a tendency to have my knees falling in. And I think that goes down to, in my teenage years, I used to play ice hockey, and the movement of your feet is a lot different. So I think the movement of my legs sort of developed differently. And over the years, I've looked at ways of redressing that balance, and I do it a lot, but it seems to tend back towards that direction if I don't 100% keep on top of it all the time. So I tend to wear um, arch support shoes when I'm doing long walks or runs. So it's worth looking into these things just to make sure you're doing them well. But when it comes to things like high intensity training, high intensity interval training, keep in mind that just because people say, oh, that's better at burning fat, that is a big impact on your nervous system, a huge impact. And depending on the exercises you're using for the high intensity training, it can have huge impacts on your joints as well. So, if it comes to running again, if you're going from walk to run to sprint, weirdly, sprinting is quite often better on your joints than jogging. But at the same time, the hit on your nervous system is huge. So the idea that you're just going to do that every day, you're not. Because if you just jump into that, and that's the sort of thing that you're going to use as your fat burning protocol, then you're probably going to burn out within a week or two. So either you're burned out because you're just so lethargic you can't do it anymore, or you flattened your nervous system so badly that your immune system is trashed, and you end up picking up bugs, and you just feel ill, and now you can't do anything either. It's very important that at any age you're considering what is your current baseline and what can you do from there. Don't jump into what people say is the best thing to be doing, because what the best thing to be doing is not necessarily best for you. It might have been best for them at the time. And what was best for you 20 years ago isn't going to be best for you now. I have seen over the years people coming into a gym, even the gym that I had people coming in who hadn't trained for 20 or 30 years, and they wanted to come back in and start doing the things that they did in their late 20s, and they're now in their 60s. You can't work it that way. Your body has moved on. So address the situation that you're at right now, address the position you're in just right now, and then deal with that. Move forward from there at a reasonable pace, methodically and safely, and you will do well out of it. But there is never, ever a reason to do nothing, no matter what age you're at. Even when you are a child, when you're 3 or 4, you just do it. You're just moving, but it's play at that point. It's not training. But from 7 or 8 onwards, there is no reason why you can't. Certainly not because of your age. Maybe because of other factors. But that's all personal to you, and you will know those things. Just don't use them as excuses. So I hope you found that useful. It's not a completely definitive guide to what ages you should be starting, but just keep in mind that at the young end, if you're thinking of your children doing some kind of resistance-based work, at 7 or 8, it's definitely something you can start considering. Just be careful with it and do it for them, not because you think it's right. If they're playing like a sport or something, like particularly if they're doing something like a martial art, they're maybe doing karate or taekwondo or judo or something like that, and building up some strength, some true strength would help them, then yeah, it's definitely something that you can consider. You just have to be careful about how you do it. Don't just throw them at a gym or throw them at weights and say, well, okay, Arnold said that you should be, squatting and deadlifting and that kind of thing, and fire them into it. The idea of them sort of doing aesthetic based work like bicep curls and tricep extensions seems a bit strange, but it's possible. These things are possible. It's possible for a child to be training from about that age, providing they have the drive to do it themselves, they have the focus to do it, and they are invested in making sure that they can work through the methodology of it and stay safe in it. At the other end of the spectrum, there is no upper limit. Just be careful. But that applies at any age. No matter what age you are, remember what you're doing is damaging. You're breaking your body down in order for it to build back stronger and meet the challenge better next time. If you break it down too far, it might be a bit more difficult to come back from that. So balance it out, challenge yourself, don't break yourself. In the next video, we're going to be talking about, is it worth joining a gym? Now, there's been a lot of videos leading up to this one, so this is more just kind of a recap to define, based on everything we've talked about so far, is it actually worth you joining a gym? So we'll talk about that in the next video. But until next time, no matter what your age, stay awesome, train within your abilities, but train hard, and I will see you in the next video.